This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hey there, Storyworks writers. What do vulnerable populations, metal detectors, cell blocks, lockdown, and SEG have to do with open mic night, writers' collectives, guest artists, mentoring, and poetry gumball machines? Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop, MPWW, brings amazing writing classes and opportunities to the state correctional facilities. And this week, I'm so excited to have Jennifer Bowen-Hicks sit down with us for an in-depth conversation about this special writing population and teaching in the prisons. Now, I have been a mentor with MPWW for 7 years and have taught several workshops in the prisons myself. My mentorship that just ended after 7 years, we actually had to get an extension on our program, on our mentorship, because Mark's a novelist. So you get that, right? Long-form fiction. And I gotta tell you, it was an enriching experience for me. Talking about my side of that, because I don't want to put words in Mark's mouth. But let me tell you a little bit about MPWW. It started with a single class of 10 students, and in just 8 years has grown into one of the largest and most successful arts and corrections organizations in the country. We've served over 1,500 men and women in Minnesota state prisons and have learned that these men and women have over 1,500 stories to tell. One of our students, Will, often says the full breadth and depth of humanity is present behind these walls. And I think you're going to feel that when you listen to Jennifer Bowen-Hicks talk about the programming and what it's like to teach inside these facilities. Let me quote 3 MPWW students for you. This class saved my life. By the way, not lip service. No one ever told me books are where people hide all the answers. For the first time in my life, I feel like a citizen of the larger world. Those are powerful words that highlight the importance of people finding their voices and their self-worth. Of course, MPWW is a non-profit, and that means it survives on donations from people like you. If you believe in the power of art, especially writing, to help people find and use their voices, if you're interested in how writing can actually change people's lives, then now's a great time to support MPWW's courses, mentorships, visiting artists, the anthology, and way more. Oh, including the poetry gumball machines. I'll let Jen tell you about those. They're pretty cool. You can go to mnprisonwriting.org to make a donation, or use the link in our show notes at storyworkspodcast.com. But look, you don't have to decide anything now. Listen to the show and hear for yourself the power of writing. Hello and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Today, Kathryn and I are thrilled to have Jennifer Bowen-Hicks here to talk about teaching writing with incarcerated writers. Jennifer is a writer and the founder and artistic director of the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop. Her work appears in Orion, The Sun, Kenyon Review, the Iowa Review, The Rumpus, The Normal School, Tin House, and elsewhere. She has received tuition scholarships from Rona Jaffe for the Breadloaf Writers Conference, a Jerome Foundation Travel Award, and more. Her work has been honored with Best American Essay Notable Mention, a Pushcart Prize Special Mention, the Arts and Letters Prize, Tim McGinnis Award, and others. She lives in St. Paul with her sons. Thank you, Jen. Welcome to the roundtable.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is exciting. So, can you give us some background about the prison system in Minnesota and just tell us if it's representative of the USA as a whole or if we're unusual here? Just give us a little context for what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will say we work only in the state facilities, and in the state of Minnesota, like all states, I'm sure there are county and federal facilities also. MPWW happens only in state facilities. So I think it's tough to know for certain because I have not worked in other state facilities, but I've visited quite a few. And I think that Minnesota is unique in a few ways. One is their support of the writing program, obviously. California is probably the leader in arts and corrections. But that's a little different program. It's comprehensive and covers all the genres. I've visited Angola and Louisiana, for instance, and most of the programming there is faith-based, which I think is pretty typical for a lot of prison systems. And so the fact that we are in a state, or we are in a comprehensive sort of situation with the state in that they allow us to be in every adult facility is also unusual. So the facilities in California and other states where they have an arts and corrections program, they tend not to cover the whole state, which means when the students we work with transfer, we just find them in the next place that they're at. So the community connection is a little stronger, I think, in our system. I think that we might be the largest creative writing program in correctional facilities, and that's primarily because of the number of classes we offer, but also the fact that we're in every facility. So,
yeah. Wow. So, okay. So we're in every facility in Minnesota's correctional system, and we being Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop, how did MPWW begin? What's the origin story here?
Sure. I taught a class in 2011 at Lino Lakes Prison, which is a medium custody facility. And I really just volunteered because I wanted to teach creative writing. And I had worked with a mentor who had a real love of the work he had done with an incarcerated writer and spoke highly of it. I also have several family members who have been incarcerated. And so my goal was just to volunteer to teach a class. And the class was just too much fun, and it felt too meaningful. And I couldn't not teach again. And I couldn't imagine why the Twin Cities didn't have more people teaching in the facilities, given our pretty vibrant literary community.
Right.
So, yeah, I asked, and honestly, people really have, since day one, not said no. And then, of course, you know this because of some of your experience. Once you start working with the students, it's really hard to stop doing that work. And so the retention is pretty good, too.
Yeah. Now, you said your first teaching experience, I think you said it was vibrant and rewarding. So that probably isn't the first thing people expect to hear when you say you've been teaching a class in a prison. That certainly isn't what I get when I tell people I'm going to go teach for MPWW. Was that a surprise to you? And what is it like to go into a state prison and teach creative writing?
Yeah, well, I'll answer the first question first. It was a surprise for a few minutes, and I think what surprised me more than anything was how sort of tenderly the students showed up. We were working with nonfiction the first night, and I didn't expect them to be so unguarded, and I didn't expect so many people to write about their fathers and their grandmothers and their childhood, and just to be so eager to speak. So that was probably what surprised me the most. On the drive there, I had sort of rehearsed what I would do if people were unruly or if the class was, just too cool for school and over it. And oh my gosh, I was so wrong. There were 6 people in the class, and their ages were between 20 and I'd say mid 50s. There was a 60-year-old man in the class, but yeah, I mean, adult men, and they really couldn't have been more eager to learn and to share their words with each other and with me. It was just a lot of fun. absolutely best teaching experience I've ever had. So yeah, that was a surprise. But then I came to expect it, and I'm never disappointed. It always tends to be that people show up with vulnerability and enthusiasm, with a few exceptions, of course. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and going into the facility, Alida, you can talk about this too, unless you don't want to. But yeah, every facility is different. So in the 8 facilities that we're in, I think of them almost all like their own country.
Right.
And every warden is like his own governor, and admissions procedures have some common threads, but they're all so different. But the sort of primary threads that run through all of them is, of course, the metal detector and the driver's license and the rules for admission. So yeah, there are some facilities require an escort, some don't. Some are really strict about what you bring in, and others aren't. They're usually quite a drive from the metro area that we all live in. And so they take up a huge chunk of your day or night. It's not a small commitment to get out there. And
right.
Yeah, a 30-minute window to get processed in before class is pretty typical. And so is waiting for your students to come in late, if that happens to be the situation for the day in that particular facility. So yeah, patience and waiting are fairly common. And the metal detector, those are sort of the 3 basics anyone can expect. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it is interesting going through that process, especially when you're new to teaching in a facility, because it's a little bit nerve-wracking until you get used to it. You know, am I wearing the right clothing so I don't set off the metal detector? Am I meeting the dress code? Do I have my clear plastic classroom bag with only what I'm allowed to bring and nothing extra? And then, you know, once you get into the classroom, I find it's easy to forget where I am.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, it feels like any other classroom, but maybe in some ways better.
Yeah.
Right? Because the students seem grateful to be there and really appreciative of learning. And sometimes you get that in like a community ed classroom, but often there's such a mixture of levels of engagement and levels of desire to learn this particular topic.
The investment,
Yeah, the investment is huge.
Yeah. Well, those spaces, I think people are probably surprised to learn, are quite often very much like a regular classroom. So they're in the education building, and it looks very much like a high school or a college classroom. Right. So yeah, aside from the sort of enthusiasm and the camaraderie in the class, the physical space doesn't always look like prison. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And I think for me, the biggest sort of piece that I cue into occasionally and go, oh yeah, this is where I'm at, is the uniforms, you know, the denim pants and the t-shirts and sneakers, and everybody dressed the same. That tends to be the thing that sort of wakes me up again.
Yeah, for sure. When after so many years, even that stops being a reminder. It's just what you're used to. Like if that's the only place you teach, as it is for me, that's just what my students wear. So, yeah.
Right. Well, besides the physical differences of getting into the building, you know, we've touched on the students are very appreciative of the opportunity to learn, but how would you characterize the students who are attracted to MPWW?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I will tell you that the way they characterize their cohort and their cohort system-wide is pretty big. I think those that stick around and work and keep taking repeat, they have said before that they think of themselves as sort of the cream of the crop, or the model students, and I think that's partly because of their interest in writing and self-expression, but I think it's also just the men and women who are ready to invest in programming and who are maybe tired of the prison culture and the stuff that happens if you're on the cell block at night instead of in a classroom in education. They're over it for the most part, and maybe weren't 15 years prior when they came in as, you know, teenagers or men and women in their young 20s. So yeah, I think that's part of it. And creativity too. I think creative individuals look for an outlet in whatever form is offered if there's nothing available. So we see a lot of visual artists, singers, people who are just used to creating and crave that. Does that sound right with your experience?
Yeah, it does. I think definitely we get students looking for the outlet for the creative expression, and also what you said about wanting to be in the classroom instead of on the cell block. That makes a lot of sense to me too. How would you characterize them as writers? Is there a predominance of one genre over the other? I know MPWW teaches fiction, creative nonfiction, poetry. There have been some screenwriting classes, I think a songwriting class. So really a lot of artists in the community are bringing all sorts of writing pursuits to MPWW. Yeah.
Well, you're asking a really volatile question.
Oh, volatile. Okay, I didn't know that.
No, I love answering this question in front of other instructors who are just like, "Are you really? You think so?" We have differences of opinion about this, but I will tell you in terms of genre. First of all, our students, the longer they're involved, the more they write in every genre, and I think much more so than writers on the outside. They excel pretty quickly across the genres because they're invested in all of them, and they don't have the luxury of specializing as much because of the way prison programming works.
Right.
We rotate the genres through. Like Faribault is not the fiction facility, right? It's in short, they take what they get. And we offer a variety of genres, so they get good in all of them. And it's really, really unusual to find an MPWW student who claims only one genre. And there may be one that they feel like they are a little bit more proficient in, but they kind of rock a lot of the genres more than I think writers on the outside. That said, I do feel like a lot of the writers we work with love nonfiction. And I feel like, and this could be my bias because I am an essayist and I write nonfiction, and that's primarily what I teach. But I think that there are just a lot of pent up stories that people are wanting to tell before they start fictionalizing, before they start focusing strictly on form. I think there's some really urgent things that they want to say, and nonfiction is often the vessel for that. So I don't know. Does that offend the fiction teacher in you?
No, not at all. But of course, I only work with the fiction classroom, so I have my fiction guys in mind all the time. But I'd like to touch on what you said about them having pent up stories to tell and really gravitating toward CNF. Can you describe kind of the experience as a teacher helping writers explore those stories and helping people find their voice, and kind of go into some of the importance of what creative writing does inside the facilities?
Yeah, sure. Well, I will preface this by saying, every class that I teach, especially when I'm teaching new students, I bring in a lot of quotes from writers about why they write. And I tear them up and we sort of pass them around like trading cards, and people can get excited about one and they can swap them, whatever. And the one quote that seems to always resonate with the class, in a visceral way where we hear sighs and gasps, is Maya Angelou's quote that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you. And that's the quote that really, it doesn't resonate as much with me, but boy, inside the classroom in the prison facility, it seems to. And I often start with childhood prompts. And I hear, it's not a secret to anybody that people who are in prison have been abandoned by the education system in many cases. Not to generalize, because there are plenty of people in with advanced degrees, but a lot of them have been overlooked by the education system, have gone through foster care, have had a lot of trauma in their childhood. And that comes out... it feels to me like it comes out when it needs to, and we don't ever write with those topics in mind. We're focused on craft and quality writing, but within that within that framework, even a prompt that allows a writer to control his or her narrative often leads them to those places. So, for instance, one of the prompts I love to start with, especially with intro writers, is, in the sensory world, right? And we start with a kitchen. Like, talk about the first kitchen you can remember. Go back in memory as far as you can and describe that kitchen. Who was in it? What was he or she cooking? What was happening in that kitchen? And man, it doesn't take long for somebody who has a story that they need to tell to launch just from that into a place of pain or, maybe nostalgia. But those open-ended prompts can guide students pretty much wherever they need to go.
All right. So now I know that some of MPWW's students have been published, and there's at least one published memoir that is it fair to say, came out of MPWW's programming? I
would say yes and no. Primarily, it came out of a writer who was going to write no matter what.
Right.
And he was writing before we got there, and he'll be writing when he gets out. He's one of those writers who can't not write.
Yes.
And so we definitely love his work and love to claim him as our own, but he was doing that work long before we came around. Zeke is his name, and he actually founded the first writers collective, I think, in the country. The first collective that was founded by incarcerated writers themselves. That was the Stillwater Writers Collective, and he co-founded that with a man named Chris. And their collective has been a model for MPWW. So it's a hard question to ask. Like, did it come out of MPWW? I would say some of it was written in MPWW. Yeah. But he's really helped shape the sort of tone and energy behind the organization because of the collective they started. It has really shown us how to build community in the facility. And so I think that he would have built that community even without us. It probably would have been a little more complicated, but he knew all along the importance of surrounding himself with other writers to sort of inspire your own writing life. And he's just a super smart, talented guy who I think, those people, you meet them and they seem like they were born writers. Yeah. and it feels to me, I'd be curious to know what you guys think, but it feels to me like you can sometimes notice that in voice. Like if you look at any writer, sort of even new writers, and think about what sort of natural aptitude they bring to the page, to me, voice pops out as such a strong tell for a talent. And he's always had that from day one. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I would agree with that comment about voice. The Zeke story is wonderful. And I find with my own mentee, Mark, I think MPWW has provided such a foundation and such a structure for him within which he's been able to find community, build community, start mentoring other writers on his own, and really grow, not just as a writer, but within the framework of the community and, as a teacher, as a friend to other writers. Can you talk about some of the maybe surprising or maybe not surprising developments within the students' communities or within the infrastructure of the DOC that you've seen as an outgrowth of MPWW? And let's just establish, how long has MPWW been in existence?
So we're just moving into our 9th year. So we've completed 8 full years, and October marks the 9th year. Nice. So here we go. We're rounding on a decade. And because of sentence lengths being, what they are, and the nature of some of the more committed students, we've worked with a lot of the same men and women for the amount of time we've been around. So we always work with new students, but we're talking about the same students over the course of those 8 years, fortunately and unfortunately. But the collective that I mentioned is a perfect example. So we sponsor collectives in 8 facilities, and that's basically, for people on the outside, it's essentially a writing group. And And why that's profound in prison is because they live in separate units and cell blocks, and you might not know who the other writers are if you're in prison. And even if you do, you might not have the opportunity to see them or to share work with them or just to be in community.
Right.
Yeah, so the collectives are pretty amazing. Those are student run and student led. We just have to show up and be in the physical space with them. And then, of course, help them with whatever they need on the outside. Like if their collective wants a reading with writers from the outside, we obviously facilitate that. But within that framework, I would say one of the things that I think I'm almost always wanting people to know about our students that I feel like surprises them is how incredibly supportive they are of each other.
Yes.
Without fail, I've almost never been in a classroom where you can't feel the energy from every student trying to come forward, to the student whose work is up for workshop. They're unfailingly patient with each other.
Yes.
You know how every workshop has that one guy who's, he's not getting it. And he's got like a 600-page novel. And, and you're like, buddy, it's just not coming together, right?
Right.
In a workshop on the outside, you would feel and hear the sort of testiness and the strain and the intolerance. I'll tell you what, it just does not happen. They're very patient with each other, very kind. And they really support each other, which is the piece that I think I always want people to understand. And I can speak in hyperbole, but in this instance, I really, really don't think I'm exaggerating. They just got each other's backs. And I think that comes from being in a community in a pretty divisive place. It is just not at least not in the education building in the hours that we're in the classroom, it is not what the prison shows would suggest about the way that incarcerated people interact with each other.
Yeah, so. I would agree. I've seen that in all of the classes I've taught when you've got somebody who's struggling and somebody else steps up to say, hey, you're going to be great. Stay in the class, stick with it, do what you can, the support is incredible.
Right. Or, hey, did you guys hear this poem that so-and-so wrote? He shared it with me and he's being shy. Let's read it. And then, saying, why don't you read that at the next open mic night? And they often do when they are encouraged by their peers. And it's a pretty important piece of the community that we are part of, but it feels very much like we're taking cues from them and building alongside them. And so, it's really, really a fun thing to be a part of.
When you first taught inside, did you know that this was going to be sort of a safe space for people to take emotional risks in their writing, to be vulnerable with each other, to, reveal things, and also to develop a supportive community? Did you have that in mind as a goal, or is that something that happened organically?
Yeah, I think it was very organic. I don't, I really had no idea what I was doing, to be certain. I don't think I had any clue, but I do think I'm an empath, and I'm okay at reading the room. And I think that people who are incarcerated by just circumstance also have to be pretty good at understanding each other's body language and sensing that sort of thing. And so I think that we all understood pretty quickly what we needed to do in that space, and people were careful with each other. So I think we were learning from each other really quickly. But I would also say I'm still getting it wrong after all these years. I get it right plenty, but I also sometimes screw up. I don't know about you, but my sort of teaching MO, I use humor a lot in the classroom, and I like for my classrooms to be pretty casual. And even now, I sometimes mess up, a particular student or a particular piece where I think I can joke with somebody to lighten the mood. And it's my students who come in and show me that I've gotten that wrong. They will usually respond with seriousness when it seems like it was warranted and I was being too flip or I misjudged it. They usually correct for me. So, I still get it wrong. And I don't know if you've been in a class with tears, perhaps not with fiction, but tears happen. Right, Aria?
Oh, look at that face. Right. Next week, we continue our conversation with Jennifer Bowen-Hicks about the role and impact of writing in the prison system. Thank you for listening to the StoryWorks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.